Hi, and welcome to another carpenter tutoring tutorial with me, Amy. Today we are going to be talking about variables. So as we start transitioning into pre-algebra and algebra, you're going to see variables all over the place. So an easy definition or an easy way to think about variables is they're the letters that pop up in math sometimes. But when you're first starting to get used to them, it can be really confusing why we have these letters popping up all of a sudden. So let's dive a little deeper into what this term actually means and how we use them in pre-algebra, algebra, and beyond. The word variable itself comes from the verb to vary, which means to change. So variables are representations that we use as placeholders when we don't know the particular value of a number or an expression within a mathematical equation, or when we have a value that can change depending on the situation. Let me show you an example of each of those. We said that variables can show unknown values. So for example, we could have something like 3x plus 5 equals 10. This is telling me that I know the particular relationship between these two expressions. I know that 3x plus 5 has to be the same thing as 10, but for one reason or another, I don't know what the value of that x is supposed to be. Because we have a comparison point here, we can actually find what that value should be. We can find the number that x is representing. So this is a situation where we use a variable as a placeholder until we're able to find what that variable should actually represent, what number that variable should represent. We said that variables can also represent values that can change. For example, if I just had the expression 3x plus 5, that tells me that I'm going to get a different value for that expression with every different number that I might plug in for the value of x. So x is representing a wild card in this expression. It's something that could change every time that we represent the expression. The first time I might say that x has a value of 1, but the next time I evaluate this expression, I might say that it has a value of 35, and I could pick any other value in between, beyond, and below those. Variables are a way for us to basically represent question marks in our mathematical expressions and equations without having to bring a question mark into the actual work. Now, when it comes to picking what you want to use to represent your variables, you're welcome to use almost any letter from the alphabet. It's traditional to use lowercase letters, although there are certain situations where we'll see uppercase letters being used instead. But there are a couple exceptions of values that we should probably stay away from when we're picking our variables. So our variables to avoid. Luckily, the list is relatively short. But one variable that you'd want to avoid is the letter O. The reason here is pretty simple. The letter O looks too much like a 0. And so it's very easy for us to get confused between, okay, is this a 0 representing a numerical value, or is this an O representing a variable? And that would change the relationship between other values in that expression or equation as well. So to save yourself the confusion, just don't use O. Another variable to avoid is the letter E. Now you may see this be used sometimes, and that's okay, but the reason that we want to avoid using E isn't actually going to impact us in pre-algebra or algebra or even geometry. But as you start getting into algebra 2 and higher, you'll find that E actually represents a particular value. It's called a constant. And since E has a special value for those higher levels of math, it's just a good habit to fall into at the beginning here, not to use E when you don't mean that particular value. So since E already has a particular number associated with it, it's best for us to avoid it now. And then finally, the last letter that we want to avoid is the letter I. This is because I is, again, in higher level math, representative of a particular concept already. So I is short for an imaginary number, and it's specifically showing us the square root of -1. I'm not going to talk too much about that value at the moment, but the idea here is that this is a value that we can conceptualize, as in we could understand what it would mean, but there's no actual value on the number line that satisfies the square root of -1. So it's a made up number that we can roughly understand, but we can never actually pinpoint on the number line. To represent that, we use I. So again, just like with E, since I already has a particular meaning, it's best to avoid it in your variable selection now. Other than these three limitations, you are welcome to pick any variable that you may want, so any letter, capital or lowercase. Again, it's a little more common to see lowercase, but you can use capital if you would like to. So hopefully this gives you a little better understanding of what variables are and where the word even came from. So thanks so much for spending part of your day with me. Let me know in the comments if there are any other topics you'd like to see discussed or further questions that you'd like answered. And also be sure to check out the description for a link to my website if you'd like to set up any one-on-one time or if you would like to send a more direct message. Thanks again for sticking with me, and I'll catch you guys next time.